Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session. And tonight is open mic night, which means it's your chance to ask me any question and see if you can stump the guru. Now, if you want to submit a question, what I ask is that you click on the link below. And what that does is it allows me a little bit of time to prepare and research and do whatever it is that I need to do in order to help you on your property development journey. So that said, we've got a ton of questions today. Now I'm out in the field in Melbourne, I guess having a little bit of a holiday. So haven't got my usual setup here. So I am going to be multitasking between a couple of different screens. So forgive me if I'm looking away from time to time. First question comes from Clinton. Clinton says, with regards to raising private funds, what are some unique, efficient, and effective ways to do this without using the direct channels such as advertising on social media, etc.? Clinton, fantastic question, mate. But I would actually say the advertising on social media is actually a bit of a problem. See, there's some challenges with regards to knowing what your rules are around raising money. And there's a particular rule called that is dictated by ASIC, the Australian Security Investment Corporation. And they say that you can't be raising funds when you go out to a public medium unless you've got an AFSL license, Australian Financial Services license, with one minor exception, and that is what they call the 2012-2 rule, or that's what it's known as. Colloquially, I'm sure there's a more official name, but 2012-2. And that refers to no more than 20 people in any 12 months raising a maximum of $2 million. Now, it's the 20 people part that when you go out on the social media side of things, that actually becomes the problem, because it's not just 20 people that you talk to, but it's actually got to be 20 people that are already known to you, and more specifically, are a personal invite. So you can't just do a blast on social media and go, hey, who wants to give me some money? Because that instantly breaches the 20 part of the 2012-2 rule. So instead, what you need to do is you need to personally know these people, which means you need to find people that you know that actually have some money. Now, nobody's going to lend you money unless they know, like, and trust you. So what you need to do is to find people that do that. Now, there's a secret weapon that's going to help you in that regard, and that is your phone book. Everyone in your phone book are people that are friends, family, work colleagues, acquaintances, that sort of thing. They already know, like, and trust you. So you've gone a long way towards the journey. What they don't know is whether or not you're a property developer, and don't know that what you're trying to raise money in I guess, the property space. So what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't call everybody in your phone book and say, hey, can I have some money? Okay, absolutely not. But rather start telling people that you're actually on this property development journey. And everywhere you go. So the water cooler at work. What did you do on the weekend? Well, I went to the Property Developer Network networking group and the like. Or I went to some home inspections, or I did my suburb selection research, or whatever it is that you're doing in the property development space. Let people know what you're doing. Now, some people are going to use that opportunity to run away. They're not interested in it. They're going to go, hey, I don't know why you're doing that, etc. But other people are going to lean in, and they're going to go, tell me a little bit more about that. And they'll actually invite themselves into the conversation. And that's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting people to invite themselves in to say, hey, that sounds super exciting. Tell me a little bit more. They're the people that you want to actually start to have conversations with. Now, it's surprising how many people out there actually have a whole bunch of money and they're paper-based millionaires because they owned a property that they bought 20 or 30 years ago, and it's grown in value, and now they've got all these assets to their value, but they don't necessarily have cash flow. They're going to be able to help you in most instances to try and help you along the way. There's also other people, I guess, high net worth individuals that I guess have invested successfully, and they're finding that their money's not scaling as quickly as they would like. They're the kind of people that are going to want to try and get invested in you as well. So it's not a matter of going out publicly and going, hey, everybody who wants to do stuff, but rather personal invitations only. Now, the other way for the know, like, and trust that does use social media, so this is a positive, is you actually need to build that know, like, and trust credibility up front. So it's not about asking for the money, but rather use social media to actually get the credibility that you are a competent and capable developer in the first place. So, for example, when somebody in our PDN community asks a question, you can respond to that question and help that person on their property development journey. Now, it is not the one question that you answer to the one person, but rather it's the thousands of people who read that post. And if you do that regularly and consistently, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm always responding to questions, always adding value, always helping someone out, then that's thousands and thousands and thousands of people who start to know, like, and trust you. At this point, when you meet them for the first time at one of the PDN networking events, or when you meet them in some other social gathering, when you do that, you've already built that credibility up front. You've already shown them that you're competent and capable in this space. That makes conversations so much easier. So in short, you can use social media to grow your credibility and your capability, but please do not use it to publicly broadcast and say, hey, I want some money. Okay, hopefully that helps you, Clinton. Now, next question comes from Ross. Now, Ross says, this is a long, complicated question, but he says, land tax is killing me. Council rates are up. Landlord insurance has doubled in the last 3 years. Interest rates are up. And even though rents have also gone up, there's nothing left every week. Apart from the capital gains, if it wasn't for the capital gains, this would be futile. How can I grow my property portfolio like this? So firstly, Ross, it sounds like you are an investor, not a developer. So I guess have had 20 years of investment experience. I've also, approaching 17 years in the property development space. So I'm going to try and wear two different hats here. So there are three different ways of investing in property. So the first way, capital gains. Second way, cash flow. The third way is manufactured profits. Now, what I'm doing in the property development space is the manufactured profits. What you're talking about is, capital gains. Now, when you're doing capital gains, you have to take a long-term view of the world. And when you're taking that long-term view of the world, it is a little slower in the process. Now, it does work. This is not about one being better than the other, but it does take some time and some challenges. And particularly when we're in markets like we are now, where interest rates are high and that sort of thing, your cash flow can take a hit. But there's three questions that you want to ask yourself at any one point in time, no matter what your development strategy is. Okay, so the first question, is it performing as intended? If your intention was capital gains, then you want to assess your property and go, is it performing against capital gains? Okay, the second question is, irrespective of the answer to the first question, what is the likelihood it's going to perform against that intended strategy moving forward? So looking at all the things that are sitting around it, what is the likelihood that that's going to go in your direction? And then the last question that I ask myself is, knowing what I know right now with the current skills that I've got and the current time I've got available, can I do better with the money? So if I ask myself those three questions on a regular and consistent basis, for me, I do that every 2 months or so, then that's going to give me, the insights in what I can actually do with that particular property. So as an example, you said capital gains is actually working for you. So you get a tick in box number one. Now, cash flow is not, but you didn't invest for cash flow. You said that you didn't invest for cash flow. So you need to if you're going to take that longer term view, you need to accept that that's a byproduct of the fact that you wanted a particular outcome. Now, maybe in your current circumstances, that current outcome is hurting you, but that's a different challenge. What we're trying to work out is, how do we actually grow our portfolio, which is what you're actually talking about. So you need to let the property do its work. The next question, is it performing as intended? Will it continue to perform as intended? Is where you are at in the market cycle going to give you the capital growth that you're actually anticipating? So if it's not performing as intended right now, or it's not likely to perform as intended moving forward, then that cash flow that you're actually trying to compromise on right now is not going to be helping you, in order to grow your portfolio and grow your net wealth. And so the easy decision then is, can I do better with the money? And by the sound of it, the answer to that might be yes. I don't know your personal circumstances, so I can't comment on that. I don't know the property. I can't comment on that. But they're the questions that you want to start to be asking yourself. Now, for me personally, I have moved away from property investment and I've moved towards property development where I can manufacture the profits. So that's part 3. The question is, can I do better with the money? Now, by knowing with the skills and knowledge that I have, I can force value onto the property. By being able to force value onto the property, it means I can accelerate my net growth much, much, much faster. So for you, mate, it's where you are in your property development or in your property journey right now. What kind of investor do you want to be? And when you know what kind of investor you want to be, ask yourself those 3 questions, and that will give you some insights into that particular property and what you should do with that, or what you consider doing that. Make sure in all instances that you go and sanity check that with your appropriate financial planner and your accountant to understand the implications of A, keeping it, or B, selling that, so that you make fully informed decisions. Anyway, mate, hope that gives you some insights into how you can do some self-assessment. Next one comes from Ursula. Ursula says, what's the prediction for the property market in Victoria, particularly Geelong? I have an underperforming property and I'm considering to sell, but the market is currently very slow. So Ursula, very similar to the 3 questions that I just said to Ross, you want to start to be thinking about, why did you actually invest in that particular area? Is it performing as intended? What is the likely long-term implications of doing that? Okay. And then, can you do better with the money? So exactly the same 3 questions that I just answered for Ross. Now, what is the market doing? Well, there are markets within markets within markets, and I am not an expert in Geelong in any way, shape, or form, but I'm, I guess, aware of some of the challenges that are currently happening in and around the Victorian market and the Melbourne market in particular. But I look at 16 core drivers that are going to be moving the market forward. Now, they fall into 4 categories, but there are 16 different elements that actually sit around this. So the 4 categories, this is what tells us how is the market likely to move forward. So the 4 categories is investment from our governments. So is there large government grants? Is there huge amounts of infrastructure being built? Those sorts of things. So where government spends billions of dollars in building new roads or new rail networks or new hospitals or things like that, it brings jobs to the area. So if that's the case, if jobs are coming to the area, that's going to make people move there. So that's going to be a positive for you. If there's no spending happening in the area, then that's a negative. So you want to start to look at things like that. Okay. Now there's a few elements that sit underneath that, but basically government spend. The next one is population growth. So there are 4 lots of population growth. There's international migration. There's interstate migration. There's intrastate migration, and there's births, deaths, and marriages. So when you look at all of those, I'm not familiar with Geelong specifically, but my understanding is from a population perspective, it is actually growing. So population is moving towards there. But Victoria as a whole has a negative outgoing of people moving intrastate. So they're going from Victoria to places like Perth and Brisbane because a little bit nicer weather, I guess less taxes and a few other things like that. Your Victorian government at the moment is quite heavy-handed with regards to the tax side of things, and just the cost of living is much, much cheaper in those areas. And so there's a lot of intrastate migration that's being countered with international migration. So international migration is up, intrastate is down. So when you try to balance those out, there is a net upwards trend, but nowhere near as big as other parts of the country. The next one is, I guess, supply and demand. So the number of development approvals, or in Victoria, you guys call them planning permits. So how many of those are actually sitting there ready to build? How many people are actually constructing, and how many people are wanting to live in the area? So when you look at the supply and demand, that's going to give you some insights into that. And the last one is housing affordability. So you're going to look at things like inflation, interest rates, and unemployment rates. Nobody can actually buy something if they don't have a job. Now, when we wrap up those 4 categories, there's actually 16 different subcategories that sit underneath that. If you want a very good understanding of those, I have a previous Sunday session that was recorded only a couple of weeks ago called Over the Horizon, where I go through what those 16 different drivers are and give you some insights into my view on how you can start to interpret those. And when you know on balance where you're moving, that's going to give you both a short-term and a long-term view on where the market is likely to head. Now, nobody can predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do whatever humanly possible to go. Understanding what is causing the market to move is going to give me some insights in making fully informed decisions. Anyway, Ursula, hope that helps you with that particular one. So next one comes from Nujesh. Nujesh says, how to secure property development finance. I've been talking to a couple of different private lenders and they all tend to have different frameworks. Are there any guidelines for you to get projects funded for the whole development, including site acquisition as well as construction finance? So, Nujesh, that's a very big question, mate. So, firstly, there is residential lending, and then there is commercial lending that sits in and around the property development space. So, from a residential lending perspective, everyone kind of knows how that works. I'm not going to touch on that because what they're looking for is a 20 or 30-year hold, and they look at serviceability and things like that. What you're asking for is, I guess, the development finance, development and construction finance. So more commercial space. Now, in this regard, what they're looking for is these lenders are looking at the profitability of the deal, and they're looking at being able to get into the deal and out of the deal as quick as humanly possible. So what they really want in order to do that is to have certainty on the lend. So if there is a development approval in place or planning permits in place, then they know that the risk of getting out of that deal is relatively low, subject to things like market conditions and cost of construction, a couple of other elements like that. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to minimize their risk. Now, if you're trying to do that with a raw site, they don't yet know whether or not you're going to get that development approval across the line. Because they don't know if you're going to get the development approval across the line, it is quite risky for them to actually get into the deal at that point in time. So you're going to find most of those lenders are not wanting to get in when it's a raw site. So what you need to start to think about is, how do I get the deal progressed far enough that I can actually do the funding for the construction before I've settled on the land in the first place? Now, there's many ways to do this. Most of you who've been following me for some time know that I teach 7 different ways that you can control a property with little to no money down. But what we want to do is we want to control the project until such time as we have the certainty of that development approval in place. Now, many, many ways to do this. I'm not going to cover all of them right now, but I'll give you a couple that are throwing out there just to help you out. So the first one might be delayed settlement with early access. So you might be able to delay the settlement long enough to get that development approval in place, in which case you've got the DA uplift, you've got the soft equity uplift from that. Now you can get the commercial finance in place because you have the certainty of the deal. You might have also a conditional purchase, so subject to development approval, for example. That sort of thing might work. You might do an option contract where you control the property for a period of time, again, until you've got the development uplift, and then you can come in and settle at that point in time. You might do some vendor finance where they will actually fund you a portion of the way, and a couple of other elements like that. You might do a JV with the landowner. So all sorts of things in order to get you across the line. But it's the funder themselves. They're going to want to come in as you've got that development approval in place. So likelihood of getting it with 100% lending day zero when you've got no approval, extraordinarily low, my friend. So your best bet, creative acquisition models that will get you further progressed into the deal, then get the development uplift from there, then get the commercial finance to construct past there. Hoping that one helps. Anastasia then has a question. To be able to apply for the margin scheme when selling developed land, where exactly should I tick in the contract of sale for the new lots? So Anastasia, I'm very aware of who you are and where you're located. You're in Queensland, so I can speak, because I can speak with authority because I know the Queensland contracts, but most of the state governments have very, very similar contracts in that the standard contract that's run by the real estate institutes in each particular jurisdiction. So REIQ for Queensland, REIV for Victoria, REI NSW for New South Wales. they have some standard conditions in them that deal with things like the margin scheme. Now, firstly, let's do a definition of what the margin scheme is. The margin scheme is your ability to minimize the GST implications of you when you are selling either vacant land or a brand spanking new home, so where GST would actually apply. So rather than paying GST on the sale of the finished product, but rather it is the margin, the difference between what I originally paid for it and what I'm actually selling it for. So an ability to minimize the amount of GST. What is super important is you must declare that your intention to claim the margin scheme on the contract, or have in writing from the purchaser in some way, shape, or form that they are willing to let you actually do that. If you don't have that, you have no ability to claim the margin scheme. It is super important that you get your advice from your accountant to make sure that you have the ability to claim that margin scheme. It's also super important that you talk to your solicitor to make sure that you've got the appropriate special condition clauses inside the contract that actually stipulate that, because the standard contracts in some instances don't have the intention to charge the margin scheme as a clause. So you need to potentially put a special condition in order to actually deal with that. So hoping that helps you, Anastasia. Next one, Essen says, has anyone got experience with removing a tree in a nature strip in order to put a crossover? I'm looking to do this in Heidelberg West, which is in Banyule Council. Is it possible to remove a nature strip tree at all? So I'm going to talk very, very generically here, because there's some slightly different outcomes in every single council. But fundamentally, if it is on nature strip, the tree is actually owned by council. So council must be the ones to actually approve the tree to be removed. Now, there are some councils, and there's 537 councils, so they're all going to deal with this slightly differently. There are some councils that are very, very pro-development, and they're going to be very, very supportive of either removing the tree or potentially relocating the tree somewhere else in order to enable that development to actually proceed. There are other councils that are very negative with regards to, the development process, and very, very green in nature with regards to protecting any existing tree. So the outcome might be very, very different. What you need to do is actually approach a private town planner for your particular council and actually understand their likelihood of actually approving this. Now, in my humble experience, looking at many councils over many, many years, if you just say, hey, can I please remove the tree? You're almost invariably going to get a flat blanket no. But if you put a full submission in that says, look, this is the intention of the finished product that I'm actually going to create. This is why I need the tree relocated, because this is where the garage is going to be, etc. If that's showing the appropriate level of density that council is actually expecting, and with all regards, with the exception of that one tree, the development approval would likely be approved, then in most instances, I see council as supportive, because after all, they are a business. They make money by charging rates. More ratepayers mean more voters, mean more rates coming through, so they could be a more profitable business in order to provide services out to the community. So knowing that that's the case, most councils are going to be supportive if you've got a development application that suggests that the tree needs to be removed. Now, there's going to be some exceptions to that. So the size of the tree, the nature of the tree, etc., might impact that. But rather than saying, hey, can I delete the tree, make a request to relocate the tree. So relocate the tree could be a matter of digging it up, relocating it, and putting it in another position where it can then be, maintained and come back to life. Or alternatively, it might be to remove that tree and reinstate an identical tree somewhere else in the community. Either way, if you say, hey, can I please delete it, you're going to get one outcome. If you say, hey, can I please relocate it, you're more likely to get a different outcome. Hope that helps. Next one is Guru. Guru says, I came across a New South Wales property that has a good land size, but has a covenant that says that no more than one dwelling is allowed on the lot. There are also some other conditions with regards to the build cost being a minimum of $25,000. So this is quite an old covenant by the look of it. The covenant also talks to the build quality must be brick and so forth. So it's very, very clear that this covenant was put in place in the 1980s or thereabouts when the original subdivision was put in there. With all of this in mind, this clearly restricts any developer of today from moving forward. So looking at this covenant, what, if anything, can actually be done? It also looks like this covenant doesn't just impact me, but also everyone else in and around the suburb. So Guru, mate, what you've identified is a fairly typical thing that did happen way back in the day, where larger developments were done. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to control the quality of the housing stock that actually came in there, because they might be doing stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. They wanted to protect the sales of stage 2 and stage 3 by saying that stage 1 had to have a certain look and feel and those sorts of things that sit in around it. It's quite common for the larger developments to actually have done that. Now, the remnants of that will sit there for years and years and years and never actually expire without you going through a process to have it physically removed. So what you need to do is you need to get a copy of it and actually understand the terms and conditions within that as to whether or not there is any ability to actually physically remove it. What is the process? You'll need to go talk to a lawyer about how to actually do that. There is a fantastic historical presentation that was actually done in Melbourne going about a year and a half ago at one of our meetups there. If you are an annual member, and I'm going to give you a link in order to how do we actually become an annual member. Here we go. Here's the annual membership. So if you actually go there, if you are an annual member, you can go back and look at that. And it's all about how to remove covenants specifically in Melbourne, but the process is identical in most states. Either way, you need to go speak to both a lawyer in order to actually understand the terms and conditions of that covenant, and then potentially a town planner with regards to how do you apply to actually have that removed. Okay, so my gut feeling, mate, is it's going to be difficult. There are going to be people in the community that will be able to have a say, and so you need to understand I guess the likelihood of that before you actually embark on that. I would certainly not be buying a property unconditional with a covenant like this. It's a very, very risky deal if you're wanting to do this as a development. If you happen to already own the property and you're willing to, I guess, risk a few dollars to go down the path and investigate, there is an outside chance that it can be removed, subject to what the conditions are, but I would say the probability in a lot of instances is low, so I would not be relying on that. But the benefit, if you do it, is clearly much, much higher. So you might be willing to put 5,000, 10,000 into the process just to understand and inform you better before actually trying to submit a full application. Either way, mate, I would not be buying that as a development site in its current form. Hope that helps. Next one comes from Amanda. Amanda says, what would you say are the most important questions to ask a developer if you're looking to invest as a money partner? Amanda, fantastic question. We get a lot of people all the time, I guess, as potential investors wanting to invest in someone's deal, and they don't know how to assess whether or not the deal is actually a deal. First things first, I'm going to say, as the money partner, you are as responsible for the money as the developer who's actually doing the deal in the first place. You get to choose who you invest with, what homework you do in order to assess both their credibility, their capability, and the deal in itself. Where I see a lot of people as money partners fail is they just take blind faith the developer is telling the truth. And whilst most people are not trying to lie, they may not necessarily be fully informed and may not know all the facts themselves. And so I have seen many projects that have not gone to plan, so what you're really wanting to do is find a developer who's done the homework and can demonstrate the homework. Now, what are the things that you're actually looking for? Well, firstly, they're going to give you an information memorandum, also known as an IM, that's going to be talking about the deal itself. So what is the deal? What's the yield that the site's going to give you? Where is it physically located? What is the demographic of the area, and what is the finished product they're actually looking for? What is the profit and loss from a feasibility perspective? Who is in their team? What are the issues, challenges, risks associated with the deal? And more importantly, what are the mitigating factors that they've actually put in there? So you want to make sure that they've actually got a quality IM. Now, that said, I have never, ever, ever seen the developer hand over an information memorandum that says that they're going to lose money. Every single one of them says they're going to make money. So you need to be able to not just take it on face value, but you need to be able to have either you personally have the skill sets or engage with someone else to do the assessment for you to determine, is there truly a deal to be had here? So can they do the site analysis and identify every single risk and challenge and problem that's actually going to occur with the site? And then look in the feasibility and see whether or not there's a line item that matches that risk. Is there a management plan that identifies the risk in order to minimize the impact of that? Now, if you find someone that has done all of those things and can identify it and they've appropriately costed that out, that is a good thing. If, however, you find some problems and you look in their information memorandum and they didn't, A, declare the problem was there, or B, put a line item in their feasibility to account for the cost of trying to resolve that problem, then chances are that is an inexperienced developer. Okay. Now, that said, there are many, many developers that are going to come to you where is deal number one. Okay. Everyone has to do deal number one. So it's not about not investing in deal number one, but rather investing in the person as well as the deal to see, have they actually done the work? Have they got themselves a mentor? Have they done the education? Have they done the research? Have they done all the extra effort? Have they got someone sitting over their shoulder to make sure that they're not going to make a mistake? So you're not just investigating the deal, but you're also investigating the person that is running the deal. Make sure that they have done all the things that need be. And ideally, if this is deal number one for them, you want to make sure that they've got somebody sitting over their shoulder, whether it be a mentor or a project manager or a superintendent of the deal, or that's something like that, where they've got someone to bounce their ideas across. Who is in their team, for example? Who's their town planner? Who's their civil engineer? Who's their architect? Who is their mentor sitting over the top of them to make sure that they don't make mistakes? Hoping that helps. Next one. Stephen says, if I'm wanting to do property development as a full-time job, how do I generate cash flow if I don't have another income-producing job? So, Stephen, this is a fantastic question. I get this quite a lot. First things first is I'm going to say, be very, very careful. If you haven't yet done a few deals and you're not very confident in running it, I would be very cautious about jumping out and trying to attempt to do this property development gig full-time until you've got a couple of projects across the board and you actually understand how a deal is run. So there's multiple ways of actually solving this problem, Stephen, and I'm not going to tell you which one is the best way because it's going to be completely different for each individual person. But let me give you some insights. So way number one would be that you would understand what your budget is and what it's actually costing you to put food on the table and fuel in the car and that sort of thing. And that would be not only is it known as your budget, but it can also be referred to as what is called your burn rate. So then you would have a nest egg that can account for the burn rate to A, find a deal, B, run the deal until completion. So it might take you 6 months to find a deal, it might take you 2 years to run a deal. So you got 2.5 years of burn rate from a budget perspective. Now, if, for example, your budget says you're going to spend $100,000 a year, then you might need $250,000 in the kitty just to account for that negative cash burn. Okay. Now, then you want to make sure that the project is going to get at least $250,000 to top that back up, plus some in order to take you back to the next level. So that is way number one, okay, is to actually self-fund that through your own kitty. Way number two would be to have the project fund you through either a project management fee, director's wage, or development management fee, something along those lines. Now, if this is going to be the case, you're effectively paying yourself a wage out of borrowed money. Now, you may borrow that from a primary bank, you may borrow that from a private lender, something along those lines, but the cash that you're giving yourself is effectively pulling forward the profits that you believe are going to happen in the deal. And I say you believe, we all want a profitable deal, but sometimes they don't go to plan. And in doing so, you're paying interest on the cash that you actually pull forward. So in that instance where I gave you before $100,000 burn rate, in that instance, if let's just say hypothetically you borrowed $1 million and the deal's going to take 2 years to run, well, then that's $200,000 of that million that you've pulled away from the deal in order to pay yourself a wage, which means you've only effectively got 800,000 in order to run the deal. Now, if you truly needed $1 million, then you'd actually need to borrow 1.2 million in order to get an effective 1 million usable. And you're paying interest on that as you go. So the profitability of the deal starts to suffer. You need to raise more capital in order to actually do that. And so whilst you feel good by putting food on the table today, it has a negative impact on your cash flow a little bit later on. Now, one of the other challenges with that, if you do that on a deal by deal basis, deal number 1, I pull out a wage. I go do deal number 2, I pull out a wage. I do deal number 3, I pull out a wage. If you're trying to use that for serviceability perspective, then your bank is going to look at that and it's going to look like job number 1, job number 2, job number 3, and you're turning those over relatively quick. So that in itself can actually cause some challenges. Now, I guess the third way is to actually do this is to actually have kind of a little bit of a hybrid of both of those. So firstly, have a couple of projects that you've actually got some historical practice on and fund that down into some form of holding company. Sometimes it's referred to as a bucket entity, but some form of holding entity that holds the cash that effectively is that nest egg that we were talking about before. But that is the one that then actually starts to pay you. So firstly, it's paying you out of profits of previous deals. So you're not having to borrow that. So you don't have the cash flow, the profitability impacts of that. Secondly, you've got many projects that are going to fund their profits and proceeds into that entity, which means that entity is going to have a bigger kitty overall, and it's going to be consistently giving you money over many projects. So it doesn't look like you're job hopping when it comes to actually lending the bank. So for me personally, I prefer the latter approach. It doesn't steal from the profits of future deals, but rather it means I've got delayed gratification. I've run a couple of deals. I've built up the nest egg. I know what my burn rate is. That nest egg is actually big enough to do that. And as proceeds from future projects come in, it tops back up that nest egg as we go. So it's kind of a little bit of a hybrid. So for me personally, that's the way that I personally lean towards. That said, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I don't need to actually draw down a wage per se in that kind of regard. So when you get to a certain momentum, then that is no longer your driver in order to pull that out. Okay, so next question comes from Rochelle. Rochelle says, hi, I'm a newbie here. I'm looking to do a 15 lot phased project. So firstly, as a newbie, 15 lots, that's a massive deal for deal number 1. So I'm both congratulations for grabbing that particular deal and also scary as heck. Please make sure that you've actually got someone sitting around you. Now, I've spoken with council and it needs an approved development plan and will require power, water, sewer extension, etc. It's a residential 6-acre horse paddock that I bought a few years ago. How do I get started and what is the best way to estimate a budget? Rochelle, that's a very big question. So clearly you're coming in with limited experience in the property development space. And so you're effectively starting on ground zero. The first thing that I would be trying to do is actually make sure that you educate yourself in the space. Come to a lot of them, come to the meetups and actually start to learn from other people's real deals is probably a great place to start. Become an annual member. And I guess gave you the link to become an annual member before. So I'm going to throw that up again. Become an annual member. Look at the back catalogue of all the real deals that we've presented before and go and look at the subdivision projects and see what sort of costs are typical and associated initially in order to go through there. Now, in trying to do any land subdivision, there's fundamentally 5 problems that you need to solve. So there is water, there's sewer, there's stormwater, there's power, and then there's telecommunications. You need to solve all 5 of those in order to get that subdivision across the line, plus a couple of other incidentals. You might need crossovers and driveways. You might need to solve things like protected trees and a couple of other things. But those 5 are going to sit every single time. Now, in order to do that, there's fundamentally 2 people that are going to be core in that team. So your town planner and your civil engineer. And you then may actually also talk to a telecommunications consultant or a electrical consultant, depending upon the jurisdiction you're in. When you start to do that, you're going to start to build the cost understanding that actually sit there, because this kind of thing is unique to every single area, not knowing whether or not the services are plugged in directly into your property or whether or not they're 100 meters down the road and you have to drag the services there. They can have a big impact on that. So your due diligence phase is going to help you to understand that, and talking to those consultants is going to give you the insights in how you can actually understand and cost out those particular things. But the next thing I would say, once you've done a little bit of homework on those back catalogue of things, get yourself some education, get yourself a mentor, have somebody actually sit over your shoulder. If need be, have a development manager come in and actually run the project on your behalf, where you can actually start to shadow them, a few other things like that. It really comes down to whether or not this is your first and only deal and you never want to do another deal in your life, or whether or not this is the start of a new trade, in which case, if it's the start of a new trade, do the work, put the effort in, learn the trade, and then go out there and apply. Hoping that helps, Rochelle. Next one, Anastasia again. Anastasia loves giving questions almost every single month. Okay, if you need to fill a site, so she needs to bring dirt in from other sites in order to top up, do you prefer sourcing your own fill, or will you, where you can actually get it for free, or will you get your contractor, I guess the person doing the bulk earthworks, to actually go and get it, in which case you're going to pay for it? I asked the contractor that I wanted to engage, and they said they'd prefer to source it themselves, as it needs to be geotechnically approved. So there's a couple of parts to this, Rochelle. So firstly, there are lots and lots of people that are needing to A, get rid of dirt, and B, receive dirt. So there is a whole market with regards to trading of dirt. So for example, if somebody is digging a hole in order to put in a pool, then they need to get rid of that dirt and put it somewhere. There's also someone like yourself who needs dirt in order to put in. Now, what is where your bulk earthworks guy has actually commented is that it needs to be clean fill. It can't just be random dirt from anywhere. So if you and there are websites that you can actually trade the soil. And when I say trade, sometimes it's for free, sometimes there's very, very minimal costs because that needs to be moved. But if you just put an ad up and says, hey, Phil wanted, here's the address, then what happens is people could just come and dump uncontrolled fill. You have no control of the process at all. But instead, if you're wanting to minimize your cost, then what you can do is you control those where somebody's saying, look, I'm wanting to get rid of the fill, and then you can go and inspect to see whether or not it's actually appropriate. Now, as your contractor has appropriately said, you will need to make sure that you get geotechnical, so do soil tests to make sure it's appropriate, and that you'll need to compact it well, etc. So don't just go and get random dirt. Or alternatively, if you want to de-risk it, now that will take time. It will also be a little bit of a process to actually ensure you've got the right thing, but it can be cheaper if you've got the time to do that. Alternatively, if time is of the essence, if you just need it to happen, and it absolutely positively has to be done in a very short timeline, then yes, you should be paying for that, because you can ensure that you're going to get the exact fill in the exact timelines that you actually need. Okay, hoping that one helps. Only a couple more questions to go. Next one comes from Robin. Who should I engage to apply for a small secondary dwelling, i.e. a granny flat in Victoria? Would it be a land surveyor, a building surveyor, a builder, or an architect? Thank you in advance. Well, Robin, firstly, terminology changes in every single state. So when we're talking about a secondary dwelling, I'm just going to give you a definition of that. Secondary dwelling is where you've got one title, you've got a main house, and then you're going to put a second dwelling out the back. Now, quite often there's going to be restrictions with regards to the size of that dwelling. So depending upon the council that you're in, they may limit it to 60 square meters, 80 square meters, 100 square meters, might be limited to 2 bedrooms, those sorts of things. So, and it may be that they need to have some linkage to the main house. So you need to be very, very careful with what kind of property that you actually put in. In most instances, though, and each council will deal with this slightly differently, but in most instances, you don't need to go through a full development approval, but rather more of a fast track type approval process where a building certifier, in some states it's called, or a building surveyor in Victoria, which is where you are, they're the same thing, just different names in different states. They are the one who's going to review, one, is it the appropriate kind of building? Two, is it zoned appropriately to do that? And three, whether or not you need to engage a formal town planner in order to lodge that. So the building certifier, if you're in Queensland, New South Wales, etc. Building surveyor, if you're in Victoria where you are, same job, just a different name. They are the ones to engage in the first instance. They are then going to tell you whether or not you actually then need to get your town planner involved, which would be a private town planner. Hoping that helps. Lucky last question, folks. Hi, I'm trying to build a dual occupancy in Melbourne. Are there any benefits of having two separate HIA contracts, so the Housing Industry Association contracts, versus having a combined one? So firstly, so this is from Christopher, the question. So Christopher, firstly, let's give a definition. A dual occupancy is actually two dwellings that are actually combined as a single dwelling on a single title. So you can't actually separate them out into separate entities. So because you can't separate them out onto their own separate titles, it is going to be one contract. You're not going to have a choice with regards to doing that. This is very different to a duplex. And if it was an attached duplex, it would still be a single builder. But if it was detached and they're separate dwellings, you may be able to separate them out as you've suggested. In this instance, though, it is one dwelling. It just happens to have two sets of keys, two living areas, two entrances, etc. But it's one dwelling on one title. So it is going to be one contract. Hoping that helps, mate. Either way, folks, if anyone, would like to submit questions for next month's open mic night, we run these on the first Sunday of every single month. If you want to do that, submit your questions down below, and I would love to try and help you out. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming events. We run these events all the way around the country: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And we also live stream them. So no matter where you are in the country, you'll be able to participate in that. So looking forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming meetups. Till then, folks, I'm going to say bye for now.